Hello, Illumineers and lovers of Lorcana. I'll never open a video of that again. But today, yeah, I've got what I've kind of enjoyed about Set 9 is I managed to get a few games in. Of course, yet we're still talking about the big black hole of not all of the cards are released. And we're not really certain that even still, since the last time of this video, there hasn't been a card too much that's been released that's shook things up for me. Looks like there's some cool stuff with the power line thing. They're getting a green goofy card that will be really interesting to play. I'm sure someone will cook with that. It looks like green and green red is like the color combo for the power line stuff. So I'm sure someone will enjoy that. There's something going on there. And if not at the bare level, I think the green Goofy can play cards for free from its discard, and the red Goofy just is a very powerful. The red power line card is a very powerful singer. So there's some awesome stuff there. But I'm always the one to cling on to the older ideas and just keep at it. So today I was sort of thinking about, well, it looks like the only thing that's set in stone that's certain for set 9 is that Amber Steel is going to be this quite dominating color. That's a color combo and quite dominating deck that's going to just take everyone by storm. And definitely week 1, if you don't want to try risk it and play something else, it's good to just play Amber Steel aggro. I think if you got any events coming up, like the one that me and Ali will be casting on the 6th of September in Zatu, it's a little shout out advertisement there for you, will be a set 9 event. And to be honest with you, I think it would be a really correct and good idea just to bring an Amber Steel aggro to those events. But if you're hoping to sort of think outside the box, in this video I was going to cover a purple steel that I think would have a good shot or a good chance at beating Amber Steel. And then if you're not really liking the idea of playing purple steel, I was going to cover the ideas of how I've been approaching deck building and how I think people should be approaching deck building going into set 9, what cards to look at, what cards to try beat, and what you're trying to achieve in the set. But for starters, we'll just look at Purple Steel. And to be honest with you, replacing Smee for Mr. Arrow, which I think you're looking at a lot of these dock decks, they're all kind of doing the same thing of that because, well, we don't have the strong body of a 3-3, but we do have an aggressive 2 quester that we can put down and start turning sideways and force our opponent to trade into them. And if we protect them and they don't trade into them, we get to quest for a little bit longer. Their 1-drop won't take it out. So you can do, unless it's like Captain Hook or whatever, something like that. But it's just good to put that threatening 2-drop down that can quest aggressively. And then later on in the game, top decking Mr. Smee was sometimes the best thing you could get, or playing Doc into Mr. Smee was also very powerful as well. So he's sort of the main replacement there. But the main thing, another thing I want to mention about in this list, and what I've kind of noticed overall in set 9 is the illusion cards, just quite a bit more powerful, especially if you've got more cheaper ones. Like of course everyone knows Iago's good because if it's a matchup where you think they could easily remove it with a action, you just don't play it. But everything else, he's always been very much a powerhouse, and Iago's pretty much a staple in Blurple, and in other decks he'll just appear because he's really, really strong. But we look at all the other illusions, and as I say about Mr. Arrow being sort of a straight replacement for Smee and Steel, because he's just going to quest for 2 and just do that role for you. He won't have the good body. But in Purple Steel, I think you can try Raja out, and why I think that is Let the Storm is Gone, which would be the most damning and punishing way to play Raja, but we took that out of the game. The only real other damaging thing is, of course, you've got all of the sort of more janky answers to it. You've got Improvise, you've got Helping Hand, Hypnotic Strength, but Hypnotic Strength would be very poor against Raja because it's just basically you're going 2 ink for 2 ink. They do get a 1 card draw from it, but they wouldn't have progressed their board at all. And if they don't remove the Raja, he's very good at just trading up different things on the board and removing them. So just being able to play a 3-3 on turn 2 that is also inkable as well. So if you've got the option to play the Calhoun, you definitely just opt to play the Calhoun instead. But knowing that you're going to put a decent body on the board at turn 2 and they're most likely not going to be able to answer is pretty good. I think you could go even further with that and look at cards like Palace Guard. Of course, Purple Steel has always had access to Giant Cobra, which I've also noticed now that like the GOAT has gone, Purple Steel is really the Merlin GOAT, not like a GOAT like LeBron James or something. But now that the GOAT has gone from the game, like the idea of reach law is kind of not that relevant anymore. Purple Steel is again the only deck that really is able to do it. So we've kind of gone to this set where Purple Steel was always just the all-rounder color combo. It had a bit of removal in it. It had consistent card draw and consistent bodies and stuff. So it did all those things, but now I feel in set 9 it kind of does the things a bit more uniquely. It has huge reach with Giant Cobra, and if you play the White Rose in there, so if you'll sometimes get into these standoff matchups against other steel decks where you're just building up the board and who turns sideways first wins, but you're building up the board and you're also gaining lore at the same time. A lot of the other dock decks as well will be using cards to cycle through and look for ways to find their next dock. Like Sapphire Steel can use Jasmine to look for it as it's an ally. Amber Steel uses Be Our Guest to look for it. I don't know what the other colours do. But Purple Steel, of course, just has the thing of if you've played some Diablo 1-drops, they're likely going to have to remove it because if they don't, it could do things like just buff up your strength at the Rage of Fire. And to be honest with you, if you played a couple early on, it's just going to put such a big lore lead for you. So it's going to have to be dealt with. That will give you one card draw. Genie will give you one card draw. So and then later on in the stages, if you could get that Namari set up, you will get to a point where you're just drawing efficiently enough that you don't have to be doing things like Be Our Guest or Jasmine. You have to scry for your next dock. You just will naturally come across it quicker than other decks will because you cantrip draw and pseudo draw a bit more. So I think there's all those awesome things in there. And yeah, it just all around to me that looks like the starting point that I take with set 9 Purple Steel. I did of course have to talk to like people who play a lot of Purple Steel like JDR, and the first thing I did was put libraries in, and he just said looks good, take library out. It feels like maybe this is not the set if you want to be playing locations, and I think that also comes down to the fact that Dwarf's Mine as well is going to go. McDuck Manor is out of rotation. Dwarf's Mine looks a bit weaker. And it's mainly down to we're not doing a lot of board wiping. There's no Be Prepared, there's no Sisu. So when you control a board, you don't tend to wipe it completely and get everything off the board. You just take maybe some of the big hitters off the board, but there'll always be something on there to threaten the location. So there may be 2 strength on there. And if you've played Dwarf's Mine, they only need to find 4 strength to remove it. So it feels like locations aren't that great, and that was the only thing that I really changed out of this list. But altogether, and of course the Lilo in there is the new Lilo. That just feels the industry standard for making these Dreamborn lists. But yeah, it feels like we don't have too much of a big card pool to mess around with other different cards in the deck. You could try Yelena in there, maybe you wanted a way to buff the Diablo, but again, the Diablo only be hitting for 2 strength. So in my opinion, maybe get some more 1-drops, because having 12 1-drops means we can double spell a bit more, and if we're playing into a dock, we don't really care if we are killing our hand, because we'll just dock and then fill up a bit. And then later on in the game, if we play Namari down, with now no Zeus in the game, that thing is most likely going to stick and give you that cycle every turn to find the next key component that you need to win the matchup. And there's 4 Fire the Cannons in here. Calhoun as well can be a bit of a brick sometimes, so you might want to just be drawing and discarding those cards as well. So again, I don't think this is an Amber Steel killer. I still feel like if they triple Daisy, or Daisy into Penny into Lady into another Penny singing strength, like all those things, or they play the manage to get Tiana singing strength, all those things are pretty rough still for the deck. Even Rhino early on, it feels a way harder to kill a Rhino, banish a Rhino earlier on, because you don't have Fox, you don't have Crab, sorry, so you can't play a Chernobog, you can't triple 1-drop buff with a Crab, take it out. So that becomes a bit more of a challenge. It may be an idea of why you might want to put Yelena in there to buff up things like Calhoun, but the way we saw it on Worlds, where DKP did incorrectly, but he managed to do it correctly in the end, was running Pete in to break the shield and then fire the cannons. Things like that, I think, are the best way to deal with the Rhino. It doesn't feel like you want to build the entire deck around it, because actually, to be honest with you, in testing, I'll build completely around the Rhino, and then they will never get the shift off, or they hard player on 4, and it'll be like, oh, I could just remove it with other stuff on the board anyway. I don't need these choose me gimmicks. It might just be this thing of the way that Amber Steel is a very powerful deck, and if they have it, they have it. There's not much you can do. It looks like it's climbing very high up the tier list right now, especially in these earlier testing environments, pre-release of set 9 and looking into week 1 of set 9. But you've still got things like you can sing strength on it, so it feels like this is still doing the fair game that Purple Steel is, but it still has its uniqueness, which is quite awesome, because I've never felt Purple Steel had anything that it did unique. But the amount of reach in this deck is just huge, and like the fact that no one really has access to the Merlin Goat anymore, which meant that like most other decks, like when I was in Blurple, I felt I could play that and bounce it, and I could get quite a lot of reach, but you can't really get that in any of the deck now. But with Giant Cobra, White Roses, you have this ability to top deck just some lore gain, or just when you're doing your curve out, playing a 3-drop like the White Rose to gain a lore as well and close the gap a bit. It's just awesome. So this is sort of where I'd start with it. And then the thing that I wanted to talk about that might not take up the rest of the video, or maybe not the same amount of time as I talked about Purple Steel, is how I've sort of been approaching deck building um, for set 9, and the things that we're looking at and the things that we're trying to achieve. So, of course, when you go in, you want to make sure that your deck has a game plan. And right now, the best thing to really do is have an aggressive game plan. If you're trying to be a control deck, or you're trying to be some sort of under the sea combo-y deck, you don't really know what you're playing against right now. It's still up in the air. It's very easy for me to sit here and say Amber Steel Aggro is the best thing to play, or it's the strongest, but that's only in my circle and my little bubble of testing. I haven't got that much data. I've only got the amount that I have from the circles that I'm in, and what I can see in Discords, because I spend a lot of time going through 20 lore and everything like that, and just kind of learning and taking in all the information I can, all of the public ones, because the public ones will make up where most of the massive players are, and what decks they like seeing, and also going through Twitter as well and seeing what people are playing at their proxy local events and stuff. So right now, of course, Amber Steel Aggro, I'm saying, is the top, and it's also the deck that's going to be asking the most questions. Can you beat Daisy into Penny into Lady Lilo? Can you beat these aggressive openers? Because I'm going to win the game and get to 20 lore if you don't answer those things. That's just what I do, and I'm going to be aggressive. Whereas if you're trying to build maybe the control deck, so if you're trying to build maybe a Sapphire Steel that's fully in on Tinkerbells and stuff like that, you've got to answer questions, and you're not even sure what those questions are yet. Tinkerbell could be great. She could be too late in the game. She could be not impactful enough on the board. She could be answered very quickly. She could be bounced back to your hand. She could be all these things, so you don't actually know what the questions are yet, and you're trying to answer them. Whereas the aggressive decks will just rush ahead. I'm seeing a lot of like green purple do well, because they also have this ability to play triple 1-drops and just aggressively quest out of the game. And I think that's kind of the bit why I've not ended up loving as much Blurple testing, because we have the standard Blurple build that we like to play with, ramp on 2, Genie or Iago, Elsa, Bell, all those things are great, but we don't know the nuance of what we're trying to attack against and what we're trying to beat, because we just don't know what's out there. Like, we could play more 1-drops because that's where the tempo was at, or maybe Clarabelle big top end sort of decks are kind of going to start forming. Maybe the Goofy Singer and whatever, and these big 6, 7, 8 cost cards might be played. Or it might just be that everything is dominated by the early game, and it's just getting these cheap questers out as early as you can, and how do you answer them? So for Blurple, I kind of, where it's at is fine, and I'm just waiting to see where the meta sort of lands on that. If I wanted to do any more, it's like, no, I need more 1-drops, or I need more X, Y, Z. But when I'm deck building, right now, there's a few things that look very much like they're here to stay, and these are the cards I'd say that you just have to know how to beat as well. So once you figure out what your deck side wants to do, and as I say, being the aggressive deck is it's easier to ask questions than answer them, especially this early on in a set. But cards that seem so relevant right now is Daisy, because they kind of cut the things that answered it very well. Maui Hero to All was pretty good. It could take out things like a Daisy. You could ramp to it and play it early, and then it would probably take some more things out before it's been removed. And if you could Pop School heal it, that'd be great. You don't have a Fox, so you can't play a small character turn 1, or triple 1-drop, or play a Tipo into Fox bounce. So there's no real fear for you to quest with that Daisy. It's very unlikely to answer it. Even with things like Blurple, I can do Royal Guard ramp, and then if I play Hypnotic Strength, I could take it out, but the issue is that will be my entire turn, and if my entire turn's killing a 1-drop whilst they have just played more 2-drops or 1-drops, I'm just going to lose those games. So it's always thinking, do I have a way to beat Daisy? And a lot of the time you might not, but just having a character on turn 1 that has some strength, and a character on turn 2 that has an strength, and both those strengths equal 4, seems to be fine. So if you have a Captain Hook into a Calhoun, you could get rid of a Daisy. If you needed to, Happy could do that work for you. You kind of just want to try and beat it out of the game as early as you can. And then you've got things like Giant Cobra in this deck that, if it sticks, that's great. And you've got cards like Lilo that can buff up things, so you could buff up Happy to take out the Daisy if required, or buff up the Captain Hook, Calhoun, all those things. If you don't get that character on turn 1 that could remove it, you play Calhoun on 2, and you play Lilo, buff up the Calhoun, and then you can take out the Daisy. So just thinking about that, if your deck can do that. I've seen some sort of crazy combo-y green blue red green sort of decks that are trying to do a lot of million things, and they're not thinking about the basics of Daisy Quest for 2, and they're going to play that turn 1 every game they can. So if you're not thinking about those things, you're just going to end up getting sort of run over and lose them. So I always think, can my deck beat early daisies? Can I remove them from the board? If they play multiple, is that going to be game ending for me? For a lot of decks, that is going to be game ending, and a lot of scenarios it will be. But I think trying to whittle it down to how would I effectively deal with it turn 1, how would I effectively deal with it going on from that in the game state is just something to think about when you build the deck. And the next one's Calhoun. I feel like Calhoun might be a card that pushes Churner Dogs, Calhoun and the Rhino as well, actually I mentioned, that kind of pushes Churner Dogs out of the game. They don't really have anything like that, and the reason why a lot of people were putting Calhoun at a 4x in is, of course, Smee's gone, so we need another 3/3 to play on turn 2, because that's what steel decks do and love. And it's also because everyone's going so aggressive, we need to be able to control the board and kind of beat it back and get some of that lore whilst we're doing it. So Calhoun is one, I wouldn't say you have to think about too much how to beat it. Of course, it's going to be relevant in every steel deck because it is just a 3/3 and you need to think about the card, but I think it's more of think about cards to include as well. So Calhoun is just going to be a really relevant card in the set, and it's just going to chase up all of these aggro decks. It also is being referred to as the thing that breaks the mirror in like all of these dockpile decks, because they're all going to be amazing on the play. Like even looking at this one, you could just go so fast on the play. You kind of need that Calhoun there to start chasing things up. And as I say, it's going to just push out decks that are full on aggression, like Churner Dogs is. The only real response they have to that is the Tramp buff card, but even still that just feels like a ton of work, and they can't turn anything sideways prior to that because Calhoun will eat them up, and then they have no Rapunzel to really get themselves back into the game. They have no Chernobog to really threaten the board either. So I feel like Calhoun is one to always think about as well. Is like turn 2 Calhoun, what's going to happen? Do I need to include it in my deck? I'm saying most steel decks are quite important here. Of course, there are some decks I think like Blurple that would very much welcome a turn 2 Calhoun, because they'll ramp, they'll play Scrooge, Genie, Iago, whatever, remove it with Bell and Elsa, and that's fine. But it's going to be noted that Calhoun is very much in the format. If you're making a deck that just kind of folds the Calhoun, that can be kind of rough. So thinking about how to play against it, but also if you're a steel deck, you pretty much want to include it because your deck might be very fast, but on the draw, you're probably just going to lose those games unless you're able to chase your opponent in the lore. And I kind of mean that in the sense of mirrors and whatnot, other dock decks. And the next one is Lewis, which is kind of like the replacement Fox card, I guess. It's the new 3-cost thing that kind of can equalize a board very early on, the same way Fox could, because you can take out these days. And of course, the dream scenario is they play a daisy and they don't really have many things else on the board. You play it you play the Lewis and target the Daisy Duck, or you target a Genie as well. That's also a good target. And they have to run it in, it's removed, and it didn't get any lore that turn. Of course, the easiest way people are thinking about countering that is just include things like Captain Hook and Calhoun. So, in those early turns, if they ever Lewis anything, you just run those characters into the Lewis. I've seen some crazy things with Sven restanding Lewis as well. That's awesome. But overall, it's just, if they play a Lewis this turn, it's as simple as this. If they play a Lewis this turn, do I have a thing that can remove it, or is my Daisy or Genie gonna have to run into that Lewis, because I don't want that to happen. I'd probably lose very badly on tempo, and that's the reason why it feels like the card can be easily countered with Captain Hook or Calhoun. And of course, if you have 4 copies of both, you have 8 chances to find it, but they're going to prey on those moments that you don't find it, or you opt to do a different line and then take full advantage of it. And if they remove the Lewises from their list, that means you can remove some of these cards that you don't want, like Captain Hook, from the list. So it's going to keep being in there. It's just this kind of standoff of we have these 2 cards. And later on in the game, Lewis might be a thing of, you top deck a Daisy and you can just play Lewis down and stop those from questing and getting new games. So he is round for stay, really. He's probably going to be in every green deck. I think he's such a good anti-aggro card right now. And the lack of singers, really, no one's putting Troubadour in their list. Getting an early sing strength is harsh. And if you're green, you might be paired with Ursula, so you could Ursula on 2 into a Lewis on 3 and basically make them have to do some very tricky decisions. But yeah, Lewis is the easiest one, I think, on the list. The counter is, how do you deal with that, is just have a Captain Hook or a Calhoun out on board. And of course, if you're a different deck like Blurple, where you don't play those steel cards, it's just getting a different body on the board, Iago is pretty much the best one to get. Because if you play a genie and it's the only thing on board, and they play Lewis onto it, you've got no friends to sing, which has been a pretty good way to beat it right now. So you're just going to have to run it in and lose it. So always be thinking about Lewis from Princess and the Frog. And the next one's Rhino. Just to be honest with you, I think the most powerful thing is, and the reason why we have 4 or 5 the cannons in here, is just shut off the shift line as quick as you can. The game is a bit slower, but when you get Rhino down on turn 2, there's no crab buff, there's no Ursula sing Zeus, there's no way to really deal with it, so it'll be there to stay for a long time, and by that point it's probably got 6-7 lore, traded up with a bunch of things, and then been penny healed to survive for even longer. So it really is, I think you have to make sure you shut off that shift line, and if not, it's going to be things like Iago and a genie to Iago and Bell to move damage over. It's going to be creative ways to answer it, and again, it's just going into your whatever deck you pick. If it's a steel deck, I would say look at cutting off the shift line, and then later stages of the game you're just going to use Calhoun and the White Rose, or Calhoun and Lilo. I'm using purple still on the screen right now, but loads of decks just have the same option. All the steel decks, sorry, have all the steel dock decks have the option to put Calhoun and Lilo in the deck, and buff up and take it out. But for all the other ones, it's just, I'm not even sure how blue-green is really going to optimally remove Rhino from the board, but I'll leave that to the blue-green experts. But with what's it called, Blurple, it's been things like move damage over, like maybe Genie hits Calhoun and then move through, or however you want to get the damage out, or just being creative and running Iago in, moving the damage. And I found Iago sticks a lot more against steel these days, which is great. But yeah, it's just making sure you have an answer for it. Of course, Blurple would have the later game play Hades on it if required, and all the steel decks can still sing strength on it if they get to 5, or they could sing enough strength to break the shield, break its resist shield, and then run things in. So always just thinking of different answers for that. And as again, going for each of these cards once you've built your deck, is can I beat all these cards, or do I have an answer to each one of these? And the next one is Genie, and I think kind of the last one, I'll put my thoughts on Under the Sea, but I don't think you need direct answers to Under the Sea. Genie is the next one. If they're on the play and they manage to establish a genie and you have no answer for it, they could surely just win off the race of that. 4 strength is pretty big. So just going to aggressively quest out. Of course, if you're playing Blurple, green, purple, you've played this matchup for a while. You know that it's Genie versus Iago and Elsa, and kind of makes the difference sometimes in that matchup. But if you're a steel deck, I think you can be pretty quick. But I feel even against Amber Steel, if there was to establish enough genies and enough pressure early on, I could just quest out with a genie for the game and win it. So it's how do we answer that? And I think a lot of the times it's just looking at using this Lilo again that's really powerful. You can buff up something like Happy just to take the free trade. And I think we'll get to a point in the meta where they'd understand that, Calhoun can Lilo will come down and maybe buff up Happy, and they'll be like, oh, why is my opponent quested with that character that should freely quest? And it's because you're waiting for the right optimal time, and then they maybe keep their genie up, and then you've got things like you can just sing strength on it. So getting 4 wide and singing strength is probably going to be the best answer for it. But on top of that, using damage buff and playing some cheaper evasion characters. There's also the steel genie, I believe it's a 3-cost one. Could be 3 or 4, I can't remember. But even that and buffing it with Lilo would be enough to remove it from the board. So it's just, do I have evasion answers? And primarily, can I answer 4 strength on a character that has evasion? Because Genie's the most impactful one. There are a few others. There's the 1-3 Tinkerbell. Then there's a few other cards as well that just have evasion. Of course, Maui Shark. But I don't know how relevant that is going to be right now. As again, in my circles, it's not seeming that popular. But yeah, it's answering cards like that and trying to beat those cards. So making sure that you can get an evasion that has 4 strength, and you could remove it from the board, if that be buff your own evasion characters, or you've got the removal in it. Strength is of course the best one. Just make sure you have all those things, and up to those cards from Daisy up to Genie. Mention them. Under the Sea is, I wouldn't say it's one to beat. I kind of wanted to put it on this list just to mention it. It's a card that you have to think about. It feels like it's going to be quite the strong control card, so you have to be thinking about, do they have enough characters to sing it? Are they likely to have it in their deck? If I flood the board now, will I lose? And if it gets such an important card, we might have to be playing Pete's in the deck. just to lock it out. But it looks like without Be Prepared being reprinted, or it hasn't been at this time of recording, Under the Sea is taking quite an important role in a lot of control players' tool set. So just thinking about that card the same way you think about Be Prepared. If they play Under the Sea now, do I lose? Do I have enough gas to keep going after this? How much value do they get out of it? Are their deck likely to have it in their list? All those things. So it's more of a cards to watch out for than card to beat, in my opinion. But on top of that, yeah, all those points, just you want to find a win con of your list, make sure that all of these cards won't be a problem for you. And when you deck build, you're never going to build a deck that is going to win every matchup and win every game, because if you did, that mean the deck would be tier 0 and everyone would play it and it would be a very boring game for us to play. So you kind of want to go in thinking, right, I can beat these matchups, so I don't want to see these matchups. And you can make more important calls, of course, based on, I don't think green purple is going to be I'm just making this as a theory. Green purple is going to be very popular, and I lose to green purple, but I beat these other decks. And you can do things like that, and that will show you how powerful your deck might be as well going into set 9. But again, you can't beat every matchup, so don't be defeated if you're having a really good time beating your mate on red purple, but you just can't seem to beat his blurple. That's fine. And you'll also have decks like blurple that it never felt very much like it had a bad shot into any deck, but it never had a great shot into the decks. And we used to have that of Ruby Amethyst back in the day as well. I think from set 3 onwards, like set 3 to maybe 4 or 5, it always just felt like the very all-rounder deck. But most decks will have bad matchups, so test into quite a few different matchups and be like, right, so I don't win this one, but I win that one. And that is a good way to sort of approach deck building, approach this game. And yeah, these are all just the cards to watch out for. This is a purple steel list that I think is not too bad, and this is a lot of me talking about Lorcana, so I'm going to stop recording now.